We are going to be sewing the curves of the Where Flowers Bloom quilt block today. The curves that are in this quilt are a little bit smaller than my normal pattern size, and they are going to require a little bit more patience and maybe a little bit more practice. But by the time you finish a quilt block, and for sure by the time you finish a quilt, you will have had lots of practice with these curves. I'm going to walk you through sewing both the smaller curve and the larger curve that are found in the block today, and hopefully it will help you to see how I adjust and how I troubleshoot on those smallest curves. So here we go. I already have my pieces cut for my Where Flowers Bloom quilt block that we're going to work on. I'm making another scrappy version of the block, and so these low volume fabrics are my background fabrics. I have piece A, which is the smallest quarter circle. I have piece B, which is my flower petal arc, and I have piece C, which is the background curve. There is room to trim in this background template C, and if you're familiar with my other patterns, you know that I do this so that if you have a little bit of stretch or a little bit of imperfection, it doesn't keep you from putting together the larger quilt block or the larger quilt successfully. There's a lot of different things in quilting that we trim. We trim flying geese and half square triangles, and I look at this the same way. We're trimming so that the pieces go together more smoothly, they line up better, and they make putting your quilt top together easier. We are going to start with piece A and piece B. We are going to fold piece A in half and finger press to mark the center. We're going to fold piece B in half, lining up these straight sides, and finger press to mark the center. Then we're going to place the two fabrics right sides together. We're going to line up the crease marks and then pin. Then we're going to pin at the end of the curve. It is important to make sure that piece B, the straight edge, lines up with the straight edge of piece A, and that it stays that way while you're sewing your curve. So I usually pin all along the bottom here to make sure that it doesn't go anywhere. We're going to do that same thing with the beginning of the curve. I usually don't pin this one. I take it to my sewing machine and get it under the needle while it's lined up and then start sewing. But you can pin it if you think that's easier. All right, let's go sew. So we keep our straight edges lined up as we put this under the needle. We're going to take a couple stitches and then we're going to adjust our fabric. And we're going to line up the edges of the two curves. We are going to adjust fabric whenever we see a potential for bunching under the needle, and that probably will happen more often with a small curve. When you do see it happening, you're going to want to stop sewing. You're going to lift your presser foot, but leave your needle down, and then just move some of this fabric back behind the needle. One of the reasons I like to pin my curves is because I like the checkpoint of that center pin. It lets me know if my curve is on track. If I get to the center and I have way more of this top or the bottom fabric, then I know that something went wrong. So either my fabric bunched underneath that I didn't see, or maybe my pieces shifted way back at the beginning of my curve. No matter what happened, I know that it's time to stop and fix it before I keep going. So I don't ever get to the end of the curve and get totally surprised by it not working out. So as we get to the end of the curve, we're going to make sure that our straight edges are still lined up. We're going to leave that pin in as long as possible. So here is our pieced curve. I'm pressing these seams open to reduce the bulk in the quilt block. And now we're going to get ready to sew our second curve. So we are going to take this piece AB. We're going to line up our straight sides and fold it in half and finger press to mark the center of the curve. Then we're going to take piece C. We're going to fold it in half and finger press to mark the center of the curve. Then we're going to take these two pieces, place them right sides together, lining up those crease marks, and then pin. And just like with our other curve, we're going to make sure that this straight side of piece C is lined up with the straight side of this piece AB section. And I'm going to pin along the bottom so that it stays put even when I'm sewing my curve. And again, we're going to do that with the top of the curve, but you can pin it or not, that is up to you. So line up those straight edges and pin. So we're going to make sure that our straight sides are lined up. We're going to take just a few stitches, and then we're going to adjust and line up our fabric. And this curve is going to feel easy after that last really small one. Again, when I take out that center pin, I adjust the second half of the curve. Okay, so here's our finished block. You can see that these seams are pressed open too. And I made a second block, and we are going to sew these two together before we trim them. By sewing these two together first, we make sure that the priority is on the arcs lining up and not just on these blocks being the correct size. So because these seams are pressed open, there are no seams to nest as we sew these two blocks together. So I am going to show you how we make sure that they line up. So we're going to put our two blocks right sides together, and we are going to take this pin and we're going to put it through the seam about 1/4 inch in from the edge. And then we're going to take that pin and put it through the seam of the second block, also 1/4 inch in from the edge. And then we're just going to push it through and leave it. Okay? And we're going to do the same thing for the other curved seam. Take this pin, put it through the seam at about 1/4 inch, and then through the second block's seam also at 1/4 inch. Okay, so you can see that our seams are lined up. I'm going to make sure that the block is mostly squared up before I do any more pinning. Okay, so then I'm going to take a pin and put it on one side or on both sides of that original pin, and then take that out. You might want to try it with two just to see how it works first, and then you can always scale back and just do the one. and then take that one out. Okay, so I'm gonna go sew that. Okay, so here's the finished pair, and it's not perfect, but half square triangles aren't perfect before you trim them either. So we are going to trim this block. We're going to choose a line on your cutting mat and line up that center seam, making sure that your entire block is over this line. There's no gaps. And you want to make sure that your measurement line that you chose comes out both ends of your center seam. All right. And then because we're trimming this to 8.5, we are going to measure over 4 1/4 inches from that center seam. And you can see that there is a 1/4 inch of background fabric at the bottom of that curve, and that is what's going to be our seam allowance when our blocks come together. And then we'll rotate this mat and we'll measure 4 1/4 the other direction. This one's a little bit off. And trim. And then we're going to measure 4 1/2 to the top of the block. And again, there's a 1/4 inch of background fabric here at the top of the curve, and that is also what goes into the seam allowance. And if you have a little bit more than a 1/4 inch, that's okay too. I wouldn't worry about it. It just means that your block is going to float a little bit. But you need at least that 1/4 inch so you can sew your blocks together. And then I'm just going to trim the bottom as necessary. So there's just a little bit down here. All right, and there it is. There are 4 of these petal units in each block. So I suggest chain piecing to make the process a little quicker. If you're using a single background color as in the pattern, you don't even have to design or do anything before you just sit down and sew through all the curves. And then you can mix and match and place them throughout your quilt top.